The prairie trail is nothing but dust and heat when the wagon finally dies. In the summer of 1882, in a remote valley of the Colorado Territory, the day feels stretched thin as if time itself is holding its breath. The sound comes first, a sharp, splintering crack that cuts through the monotonous creak of wood and leather, as clean and final as a rifle shot echoing across empty country. Grace Harlow feels it through the reins before she understands what it means, a violent shudder that travels up through her blistered palms and into her aching shoulders. Then the wagon lurches hard to the right, dropping at a sickening angle, and the whole world tilts sideways. The front wheel has split along the grain, the ancient wood finally surrendering after 300 miles of alkali flats and stone-studded trail. Spokes splinter outward like broken ribs. The iron rim, no longer held by anything more substantial than prayers and momentum, tears free and goes rolling off into the sage, wobbling drunkenly before it falls with a dull clang that sounds like a funeral bell in the stillness. Grace hauls back on the reins, her voice cracking as she calls, "Whoa, whoa, now." But the mule in the traces is already done. The animal's legs fold beneath it as if the strings holding it upright have been cut. It goes down hard flanks, heaving once, twice, and then the great barrel of its chest simply stops moving. Foam flecks the corners of its mouth. Its eyes ringed with white and already glazing stare at nothing. For a long moment, there is only silence. Then Marta begins to cry. Grace climbs down from the ruined wagon seat, her legs barely supporting her weight. Every muscle in her body protests. Her thighs scream from days of bracing against the constant jolting. Her spine feels compressed to half its normal length, and her feet, wrapped in rags because her shoes wore through 2 weeks back, throb. With the kind of pain that has become so constant, she barely notices it anymore. She is 26 years old. She feels ancient. Eli stands beside the dead mule, his 8-year-old face blank, with a kind of shock that looks obscene on someone so young. He has his father's eyes, serious, dark brown, thoughtful, and right now those eyes are fixed on the animal's slack mouth and the flies that are already beginning to gather in the heat. He does not cry. He has not cried since they buried Leander in the hard-packed cemetery behind the company store. When the mine foreman said the words about God and dust, and the other men stood with their hats in their hands and said nothing about murder. Marta is 6. She still cries. She cries now, her small body shaking against Grace's hip, her face buried in the filthy calico of her mother's dress. The sound is high and thin, hopeless, in a way that makes Grace's chest feel like it is being crushed in a vice. Grace sinks down into the dirt beside the wagon and pulls both children close. Marta fits against her left side, hot and damp with tears. Eli presses against her right, rigid as iron, his small jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. The yellow dog that has been following them for 2 days whines and paces in nervous circles, its nose low to the ground, sensing danger in the way animals always do before people catch up. The letter is still clutched in Grace's right hand, and the paper soft as cloth from being folded and unfolded and read 100 times. She can feel the creases, the places where Leander's name appears in Samuel Briggs's cramped, frightened handwriting. The words that spell out exactly how her husband died and who killed him and why. She holds it so tightly, her knuckles have gone white. Behind them, perhaps a mile distant across the empty flats, the red mesas rise like broken teeth against a sky so pale with heat it has lost all trace of blue. The sun is a physical weight, pressing down on the crown of her head. In another hour, it will begin its slow descent toward those mesas, and when it drops below the horizon, the temperature will plummet and the coyotes will come out to sing their eerie yipping songs, and anything left alive and exposed on this open ground will have to fight to stay that way through the night. Grace thinks we are going to die here. She thinks I brought my children into the desert to die because I believed in justice. She thinks, Leander, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Then she hears hoofbeats. Her head snaps up, heart hammering instantly from exhausted despair into pure animal terror. Her hand goes to the small folding knife in her apron pocket, 3 inches of dull steel, inadequate for anything more dangerous than peeling potatoes, but it is all she has. She pushes the children behind her, rising to her feet, on legs that shake like a newborn calf's, and faces the direction of the sound. The figure that materializes through the heat, shimmer, is not what she expects. A Lakota warrior runs beside his paint horse rather than rides it, his moccasined feet striking the hardpan in a steady ground-eating rhythm that speaks of endurance, cultivated over a lifetime. He wears buckskin leggings and a shirt decorated with intricate quill work that catches the light in subtle waves of color, deep blue, burnt ochre, the red-brown of dried blood. His chest is bare beneath an open leather vest, skin the color of weathered copper sheened with honest sweat. A single eagle feather is bound into his long black hair, and that hair moves with each stride, loose and gleaming like water. His face is all hard planes and angles, high prominent cheekbones, a strong nose, a mouth set in a line that suggests neither cruelty nor kindness, only a kind of watchful neutrality. His eyes, when they fix on Grace and the broken wagon and the dead mule, are dark as river stones and just as unreadable. A long rifle rides across his back, and a knife handle protrudes from a beaded sheath at his belt. At his heels lopes a lean dog with pale amber eyes, and a notched ear, its ribs showing through a coat the color of old bone. He slows to a walk 20 feet away, one hand resting on his horse's sweat-darkened neck. The horse blows hard nostrils, flaring red flanks, heaving. He has been running it hard, but not cruelly. Grace can see that in the way he steadies the animal, the way his hand moves in a slow, soothing rhythm along its shoulder. For a long moment, they simply look at each other across the dusty distance. Grace knows what he sees. A white woman in a torn dress, barefoot face burned dark by the sun, except for the white salt tracks where sweat has run 2 hollow-eyed children clinging to her like drowning swimmers to driftwood. Desperate. Helpless, easy prey or easy charity depending on his inclination. She wonders what she sees. A savage, her mother's voice whispers from memory, all the old Kansas prejudices rising like bile. But her mother died of consumption when Grace was 14, and Leander taught her to judge people by their actions, not their ancestry. What she sees is a man who has been traveling hard, whose horse is exhausted but not broken, who carries weapons but has not drawn them, who watches her with the careful attention of someone deciding whether she is a threat or simply another piece of wreckage in an unforgiving land. Grace's throat is so dry, the words come out like gravel scraping stone. "I'll pay whatever I have left," she says, and her voice cracks halfway through. "Just take us to town." The warrior's eyes move from her face to the children, to the dead mule, to the broken wheel, reading the situation with the same careful attention a scout reads tracks in dust. His gaze lingers for a moment on the letter still clenched in her fist, then rises to meet her eyes again. The smart choice, the safe choice would be to keep riding. The river lies in the opposite direction, and his own people are there. And white settlers' problems are not his concern. Especially not when those problems involve traveling deeper into country, where a Lakota warrior might be shot on sight by nervous homesteaders or overeager soldiers. He nods once, a single decisive dip of his chin. Grace's knees nearly buckle with relief. "Tokala," he says, and it takes her a moment to realize it is his name, not a greeting. "Grace Harlow," she manages. "This is Eli. This is Marta." Tokala moves with economical efficiency, wasting no motion. He unhitches the dead mule, stripping the leather harness with practiced hands, and uses the salvaged straps to rig the wagon tongue higher and at a different angle. His horse stands patient through this indignity, too well trained or too exhausted to protest. Grace and the children drag what they can from the wagon bed. One battered trunk, a sack of flour gone hard, as Clay a crate of Leander's tools that Grace could not bear to leave behind, because they still smell like him, like sawdust and honest work, and the tobacco he used to chew. When the wagon is ready, Tokala pauses and gestures toward the letter. Grace hesitates, then hands it over. He reads slowly, his lips moving slightly with the effort of parsing English script, and with each line his expression grows harder and more remote, until it looks like his face has been carved from the same stone as the mesas. When he finishes, he folds the paper with great care and returns it to her. His voice when he speaks is flat and controlled, each word measured. The poisoned camp this letter speaks of is mine. I buried a girl named Winona 3 moons past, 4 winters old. There have been others. 5 children in 1 year, and still the white men in town call me murderer and raider. His jaw works. This paper says different. Then you know what it's worth, Grace says. I know what it will cost. He looks west toward the distant smudge on the horizon that might be Bear Creek. Your judge may not believe you. White law does not often favor white women who travel with Indians. It's all I have left to try, Grace says simply. Tokala regards her for another long moment, then nods again and begins walking, leading his horse and the crippled wagon west. Grace lifts Marta onto the wagon seat and helps Eli up beside her, then climbs up herself. The children press against her sides, radiating heat and fear and exhausted hope. The sun drops lower. The shadows lengthen. They move at a painful crawl, no faster than a man can walk, because the cracked wheel will not support more speed across country that grows gradually more broken and vertical, more prone to ravines and sudden drops. Tokala walks ahead, his dog ranging back and forth, and neither makes a sound louder than breathing. That night, they camp without fire, in a shallow depression surrounded by tumbled boulders. Tokala walks the perimeter until Grace loses sight of him in the darkness. She wraps the children in the one threadbare blanket and lies awake, listening to Eli's too rapid breathing and Marta's occasional whimpers and the distant yipping of coyotes that sounds almost like laughter. When Tokala returns, he sits with his back to a boulder and his rifle across his knees. He does not sleep. Grace watches him through half-closed eyes and realizes he is listening to something beyond the normal sounds of night. Reading the darkness the way he read her desperation this afternoon, interpreting a language she does not speak. "Why did you stop?" she whispers finally. Silence stretches so long, she thinks he will not answer. Then, because I have seen too many die for one man's greed. The earth cries out when children are killed before their time. I will not see more if I can prevent it. Grace closes her eyes and feels the letter pressing against her ribs beneath her dress. She thinks of Winona and the 4 others, and of Leander crushed in the dark, and she understands that they are bound now by more than necessity. They reach Wolf River Ford at dawn 2 days later. The water runs cold and clear over smooth stones, mist rising in ghostly columns that glow pink and gold in the early light. It is the first clean water Grace has seen in weeks, and the sight of it makes her throat tighten with something like grief. Tokala stops abruptly at the ford's edge, one hand raised. Grace sees it at the same moment he does, hoofprints churned into the soft mud of the far bank, too many to count, overlapping each other in chaotic patterns. Fresh enough that water is still seeping slowly into the deepest impressions. And hanging in the cool morning air, acrid and wrong, is the smell of smoke. They find the burned wagon a quarter-mile downstream. It lies on its side like a slaughtered animal, ribs of blackened wood protruding from canvas that has been reduced to ash and a few hanging tatters. The contents are scattered tin plates, bent and blackened, a woman's comb with half its teeth broken, a child's cloth doll face down in the mud, with its dress charred away, and bodies. 3 of them. Grace makes a small choked sound and immediately turns Eli and Marta's faces away. pressing their heads against her shoulders so they cannot see. But she has already seen, and she knows she will see it again every time she closes her eyes, the man lying on his back, with his hands bound behind him and his throat cut so deep his head is nearly severed. The woman sprawled nearby with her dress torn from shoulder to waist and her eyes staring at nothing. And the teenage boy, perhaps 15, perhaps younger, crumpled against the wagon wheel with a crude red handprint smeared across his shirt in what might be paint or might be his own blood. Takala moves through the scene with his rifle ready, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The killers are long gone, and the tracks lead south, maybe 6 hours old, but their brutal carelessness remains like a stench in the air. Under the overturned wagon seat, tucked into a leather satchel that somehow escaped the flames, Takala finds a ledger. It is a narrow book bound in dark leather, perhaps 8 inches by 5, the pages scorched along one edge but mostly intact. He opens it carefully, and Grace leans in to read over his shoulder, squinting at the cramped handwriting, Job Miller, Family Wagon, Eastern Trail. Paid to J. Klein, T. Morrison, R. Watts. Amount $200. Bonus, $50 town believes Sue Job Henderson homestead burned. Paid to Q, Hobbs and Riders. Amount $150. Bonus, $75 red paint used feathers scattered Job Garrett supply wagon North Ford. Paid to J. Klein, T. Morrison. Amount $175. Bonus, $50 war cries reported by survivor. The list goes on. Page after page of careful accounting, each entry a murder disguised as an Indian raid, each one stamped at the top with Rusty Joe Harper's cattle brand, the Circle H, that everyone in 3 territories knows. But there is more. Interspersed with the kill orders are entries of a different kind, loaned to Territorial Governor's Office, $5,000, round 15% monthly. Collateral water rights, Wolf River sections 1114. Payment from Judge L. Morrison, $200 favorable ruling land case, number 47. Partnership investment with Senator J. Whitmore, $10,000, 40% mindshare quarterly distributions, bribe to Sheriff M. Brennan, $300 monthly retainer, blind eye to operations. Grace's hands are shaking as she pages through the book. This is not just evidence of murder. It is a map of corruption that reaches from this dusty ford all the way to the territorial capital. Every page documents another thread in a web of power built on blood and bribery, and the calculated destruction of anyone who asks too many questions. He can't destroy this. Grace breathes understanding, flooding through her with terrible clarity. These aren't just records of crimes, they're records of debts owed, favors, blackmail. If Harper burns this ledger, he loses his hold over every powerful man in the territory. He loses everything. Then he will kill anyone who tries to take it from him, Takala says quietly. Grace is about to reply when rifle shots crack from the cottonwood trees on the north bank. The sound is flat and hard, echoing off the water. Bullets smash into the burned wagon with meaty, splintering impacts that send splinters flying. The yellow dog yelps and bolts for cover. Takala shouts, "Move!" and shoves Grace hard toward the ford. She scrambles onto the wagon seat, dragging both screaming children with her, and slaps the reins against the paint horse's flank with all her strength. The animal lunges forward into the current. Water surges up immediately, shockingly cold, rising to the wheel hubs, and then higher, soaking through the floorboards and drenching their feet. Marta shrieks. Eli clings white-knuckled to the seat edge, his eyes squeezed shut. More shots. Grace can hear them whining through the air, can hear them smacking into water and wood. One passes close enough to her head that she feels the displacement of air like a slap. Takala splashes alongside the wagon rifle in one hand, the stolen ledger clutched against his chest with the other. "There!" he shouts, pointing toward a specific tree where muzzle flash has just bloomed orange. "High and right shoot." Grace's hands are shaking so violently she can barely hold the wagon rifle, Leander's old Sharps, that he bought 3 years back and taught her to fire at tin cans behind their rented cabin. She braces the heavy stock against her shoulder, aims at the spot Tokala indicated, and forces her breathing to slow the way Leander showed her. Breathe in. Hold. Squeeze, don't pull. The recoil slams into her shoulder with brutal force, a deep ache that she will feel for days. Her shot splinters a thick branch directly above the hidden gunman's position, showering him with leaves and bark. She sees a flash of movement as he ducks, hears a muffled curse, and then Tokala is firing too. His shots methodical and precisely spaced, keeping the shooter's head down. The wagon lurches violently up the far bank, water streaming from every board. Grace whips the exhausted horse forward with the reins not daring to look back, and they crash through low brush and into the relative shelter of a rocky outcrop on the far side of the ford. For a moment, there is only the sound of harsh breathing and water dripping, and the paint horse's labored panting. Then from somewhere behind them comes the sound they all dreaded: hoofbeats, multiple riders moving fast. Tokala vaults into the wagon bed, his face set in hard lines. They know we have the ledger now. Harper will send everyone he has. Grace looks at her children, Eli pale and silent, Marta sobbing against her brother's shoulder, and then at the blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on Tokala's shoulder where a bullet grazed him during the escape. She looks at the broken wagon wheel that is held together now by nothing more than wire and desperation. She looks west toward Bear Creek, still days away over country that is about to become a killing ground. Then we'd better not stop, she says, and slaps the reins again. Behind them, the hoofbeats grow louder. The trail climbs into country that seems designed to break wagons and spirits in equal measure. Grace has lived her entire 26 years in flat Kansas farmland and the mining camps of Colorado, and this terrain, all vertical stone and sudden drops and switchbacks, carved along cliffs that fall away into nothing, is foreign and terrifying in ways she has no words for. The cracked wheel groans with every rotation. Tokala walks beside it constantly now, one shoulder braced against the wagon's side, ready to throw his full weight against the tilt whenever they hit a deep rut or protruding stone. His wounded shoulder has begun to seep again, despite Grace's best efforts at bandaging it with strips torn from her already tattered petticoat. She can see the stain spreading on his buckskin shirt, dark and wet. They stop at midday in the thin shade of a rock overhang that provides marginal relief from the hammer of the sun. The children are beyond exhausted. Marta has stopped crying and simply stares with glassy eyes at nothing. And Eli moves with the mechanical efficiency of someone whose body is still functioning while his mind has retreated somewhere safer. Tokala produces his water-skin buffalo hide, tanned soft and sewn with sinew, and hands it first to Grace. She starts to pass it immediately to the children, but he stops her with a gentle hand on her wrist. "You drink first," he says quietly, firmly. "If you fall, they cannot survive. You must stay strong to protect them." The logic is irrefutable, and Grace hates it. She takes 3 long swallows that taste like salvation, and then gives water to Marta and Eli, watching carefully to make sure they drink slowly. Only after the children have drunk does Tokala take his own share, and Grace notices he takes less than any of them, leaving a reserve in case of emergency. "Where did you learn English?" Grace asks, partly to distract the children from their misery, and partly because she genuinely wants to know this man who has saved their lives. "Missionaries came to our winter camp when I was young," Tokala replies, examining the wagon wheel with careful attention. "Black robes who wanted to teach us about their God and their book. My grandfather said I should learn their tongue so I could understand what they truly wanted from us." He glances at her. He was right. They wanted our land and our children. But the language has been useful, more useful than their prayers. As they rest, Tokala shows Eli how to wedge small stones into the widening crack in the wheel to keep it from splitting further. He guides the boy's hands patiently, teaching him the right size and shape, how to hammer them gently into place with the flat side of a hatchet blade. The wheel is like a people. Tokala tells Eli, his voice taking on the cadence of a teacher. When there is a crack, a weakness, you shore it up with what you have. Small stones, small actions. Each alone is nothing but many. Together make it strong enough to continue the journey. Eli listens with an intensity that makes him look older than his 8 years, his small hands following Tokala's instructions with careful precision. Grace watches them work together and feels something twist painfully in her chest. Grief for Leander, who should be here teaching these things, gratitude for this stranger who has stepped into a role he never asked for. They press on through the afternoon. The landscape grows more forbidding with each mild juniper and pinyon pine clinging to impossible slopes, hawks circling on thermal currents, with their lonely cries echoing off stone walls. Once they startle a rattlesnake sunning itself on a flat rock, and the sound of its warning rattle makes Marta whimper and press closer to her mother. That evening, they make camp in a narrow depression sheltered by wind-carved boulders. There is barely room for the wagon, but the rocks provide protection from sight and some small defense if Harper's men find them in the night. Grace uses the last of their flour to make flat cakes on a stone heated by a tiny fire that Tokala builds and screens carefully with other rocks to hide the light. The cakes are tough as leather and taste of nothing but ash, but they are food. When Grace automatically divides her portion to give larger shares to the children, Tokala silently slides part of his own meager meal onto her bent tin plate. "I am not hungrier than you." Grace protests, her pride stung despite her exhaustion. "No," Tokala agrees calmly. But children draw their strength from their mother. If you weaken, they feel it, even if you hide it from their eyes. Eat. Grace wants to argue, but her body betrays her. Her stomach clenches at the sight of food, and her hands move of their own accord. She eats and tries not to think about tomorrow, when there will be no flour left at all. After the children fall asleep, huddled together under the thin blanket, Grace and Tokala sit on opposite sides of the dying fire. The silence between them is not uncomfortable, but it feels weighted with unspoken things. "Your husband," Tokala says finally, his voice low enough not to wake the children. "What manner of man was he?" Grace stares into the embers, and for a moment the grief is so sharp she cannot breathe around it. But then she finds words, and speaking Leander's name aloud brings him back for just a moment, makes him real again, in a way that eases the ache even as it deepens it. "Leander was solid," she says softly. "Like an oak tree, strong, dependable, deeply rooted. He never raised his voice in anger, never lifted his hand to me or the children. He believed a man's word was his bond, that honest work was its own reward, that doing right mattered even when it cost you everything." Her voice breaks slightly. It cost him everything. His honesty, his questions, his refusal to look away from wrong. Tokala nods slowly. He walked the path of a warrior, and then even if he carried no weapon and painted no face. We say such a man walks in balance with the world. The earth holds his memory. Grace looks at him across the firelight, this Lakota warrior who speaks of honor and balance and memory, and feels something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The recognition of a kindred spirit forged in the same fires of loss and determination. "The letter said 5 children died in your camp," Grace says carefully. "Will you tell me about them?" Tokala's face goes still as carved stone. For a long moment, Grace thinks he will not answer, that she has pushed too far into private grief. But then he speaks, his voice controlled but rougher at the edges, as if each word costs him something. Winona was first, my sister's daughter 4 winters old. She loved to sing while she worked with her mother, learning to tan hides and bead moccasins. Her voice was like water over stones, clear and bright. He pauses, jaw working. She died screaming because her belly swelled, and we did not know why the water had turned against us. Then 2 brothers' sons of our elder. Strong boys who should have grown to hunters. Then a boy named Tahatan, who loved to fish, who could sit by the river for hours with patience I have never seen in one so young. And a girl, Zitkala, only 6 winters, who sang the old songs better than women twice her age. His voice breaks slightly on the last name, and he stops breathing carefully through his nose. I watched my sister hold Winona's body and scream at the sky. There are no words in any language for that sound. It is the sound of the world ending. Grace feels tears on her face, but makes no move to wipe them away. The silence that follows is profound, and shared a recognition of grief so deep, it has carved them both hollow and reshaped them into something harder. We will make Harper answer for it, Grace says, and her voice carries an edge like tempered steel. For Leander, for Winona, for all of them. We will stand before that judge, and we will tell the truth, and Harper will not be able to lie his way free. If we reach the judge alive, Takala says. And if the judge is willing to hear truth from an Indian and a widow woman against the richest man in 3 territories, then we make him hear it, Grace says simply. Or we die trying, but we do not die silently. Takala looks at her for a long moment, and something passes between them, an understanding, an alliance deeper than mere survival. He nods once, and they sit together in companionable silence, as the fire burns down to ash and the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. The next 2 days blur together in a haze of heat and grinding exhaustion. The wheel grows worse. Twice more Tokala must stop and spend precious time wedging stones into the expanding crack, showing Eli the technique each time until the boy can do it himself with only minimal guidance. Grace sees what Tokala is doing, teaching Eli skills he might need if Tokala falls, preparing the boy to survive without him. And the thought makes her chest tight with fear and gratitude in equal measure. They see dust on the horizon behind them twice. Harper's men still hunting. But the broken country works in their favor. Now there are 100 places to hide, 1,000 ways to lose pursuit in the maze of ravines and washes that score these hills. Tokala reads the land like a scout, reading tracks, guiding them along paths that leave minimal sign, always choosing routes that offer cover and escape. On the 3rd evening, they reach Ezekiel Burns's shack. The shack perches on a narrow shelf above an old played-out mine, a structure so weathered and listing it looks like a strong wind might finally knock it over. But smoke rises from its crooked stovepipe, and lamplight glows yellow in a dirt-streaked window. It is the first sign of habitation they have seen in days, and the sight brings a complicated mixture of hope and dread to Grace's exhausted mind. A man sits on the narrow porch, hunched over and cradling one hand wrapped in filthy, blood-soaked rags. His face is gaunt bones pressing sharp against thin skin, and his eyes have the fevered brightness of serious illness. Beside him stands an older man, gray-bearded and stooped, holding a worn leather medical bag and examining the wounded hand with professional concern. The gaunt man is Ezekiel Burns. The doctor is Albert Finch. Ezekiel's eyes widen when he recognizes Grace climbing down from the wagon, and something flashes across his face, surprise, fear, something else. Grace cannot quite read, but that sends an uneasy prickle down her spine. Grace Harlow. Ezekiel breathes his voice, hoarse and ruined. Sweet mercy, girl, I never thought I'd see you alive. Word in Bear Creek is you and a renegade Indian killed a family on the trail, and Harper's men are hunting you both for murder. That's Harper's lie. Grace says flatly, every word shaped by exhaustion and anger. His men are the ones doing the killing, Ezekiel, dressing up like Indians and murdering families to turn folks against the Lakota. You know this. You worked with Leander to expose Harper's crimes. Something flickers across Ezekiel's face again, guilt calculation, but he nods slowly. Come inside. Rest. We need to talk. Dr. Finch helps Ezekiel to his feet and ushers them all into the shack's single room. It smells of sickness and old smoke and the sour smell of infection. Finch makes the children as comfortable as possible on a pile of old blankets in the corner, giving them water and the heel of a loaf of bread that he produces from his bag. Grace sinks onto a three-legged stool, every muscle in her body trembling with relief at finally being still. Tokala remains standing near the door, his rifle never far from his hands, his eyes constantly moving between the room's occupants and the darkening world outside the window. Over 10 cups of bitter chicory coffee, Ezekiel tells his story. His voice shakes, and his remaining good hand trembles as he speaks, and Grace wants to believe the emotion is genuine remorse rather than fever and fear. Leander and Ezekiel had worked together, Ezekiel confirms. They had discovered Harper's illegal water diversion, had documented the poisoned outflow going into the Lakota camp. Leander had managed to copy 1 page from Harper's private mine ledger proof of the tunnel's proof that Harper knew exactly what he was doing. They had planned to present the evidence to Judge Holloway together. But before we could act, Ezekiel says, his voice breaking, that timber fell on Leander. They said it was rot, said it was bad luck. But I heard men talking the night before outside the supply shed where I was sleeping off a drunk. I didn't see faces, but I heard Harper's name mentioned. I heard them laugh about making sure that big-mouth freight driver has an accident tomorrow. He looks at Grace with eyes that beg for something, forgiveness, absolution, and tears run down his wasted face. I knew, Grace. I knew. And I said nothing because I was scared. Too damned scared. And now the knowledge is eating me alive worse than this infection. He produces the copied ledger page from a tin box hidden under a loose floorboard, and along with it, a rough map showing abandoned mining ravines that lead into Bear Creek while bypassing the main road. And wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom of the box is a small wooden crate containing perhaps a dozen sticks of dynamite and a bundle of fuses. Leander said to keep this in case it was ever needed, Ezekiel explains. To blow the dam, to put the river right. I've held on to it all this time. Now I guess it's yours to use as you see fit. Dr. Albert Finch, who has been quietly tending Ezekiel's ruined hand during this conversation, finally speaks. His voice is heavy with its own burden of guilt. Harper has been leaning on me for 5 years. Albert says quietly, not meeting anyone's eyes. Forcing me to falsify death certificates to mark poisoning as natural causes and murder as accident. He told me last month that doctors who know too much sometimes have unfortunate accidents of their own, falls from horses, bad reactions to laudanum. He was specific enough that I understood he'd already planned it. He looks up finally, meeting Grace's eyes. I've been a coward, Mrs. Harlow. I've signed my name to lies and let children die without speaking for them. Helping you is the only way I can see to redeem even a small part of my soul. I'll testify before Judge Holloway. I'll tell everything no matter what it costs me. Grace reaches across the narrow space and grips Albert's weathered hand. Thank you. Thank you for your courage. They rest for a few hours. Grace knows they need to leave before dawn, need to keep moving while they still have darkness for cover. But exhaustion has its own gravity, and she allows herself to close her eyes for just a moment. She wakes to Tokala's hand on her shoulder, gentle but urgent. The quality of darkness outside has changed false dawn perhaps an hour before sunrise. Time to move. As they prepare to leave, Ezekiel pulls Grace aside with his good hand, gripping her arm with surprising strength. "There's something you should know," he says urgently, his fevered eyes searching her face. "Harper's put a price on your head, $1,000 dead or alive. Every bounty hunter and desperate man between here and Denver knows about it. You won't make it to Bear Creek, Grace. You should take the children and run east, far as you can go." Grace pulls her arm free, her jaw set. "I didn't come this far to run." Something unreadable flashes in Ezekiel's eyes, that same expression from earlier, gone almost before it registers. He nods jerkily and steps back. They load the wagon with the supplies. Ezekiel and Dr. Finch have provided the copied ledger page, the map, the carefully wrapped explosives, some jerked meat and hardtack that will keep them fed for a few more days. As the sky begins to lighten in the east, they start down the treacherous trail that will, if Ezekiel's map is accurate, bring them to Bear Creek by a route Harper's men are not watching. Grace does not look back at the shack, does not see Ezekiel standing on the porch, watching them go with an expression of sick guilt and resignation on his wasted face. What she does not know, what she cannot see, is the single set of fresh hoof prints leading away from behind the shack prints, made perhaps 3 hours earlier, heading directly toward Bear Creek at a gallop. 2 days of brutal travel bring them to the edge of the high country. The trail descends now, dropping toward the broad valley, where Bear Creek sprawls along Wolf River's main branch. The going is treacherous, narrow switchbacks carved along cliff faces, loose rock constantly threatening to cascade beneath the wagon wheels. Twice the failing wheel nearly gives way completely, and only Tokala's lightning reflexes, jamming stones under the rim, bracing the wagon with his full weight, while Grace guides the horse forward, keeps them from plunging into the ravine below. On the second afternoon, the trail finally opens into a wide meadow bordered by scrub oak and granite boulders. The grass is brown and drought-stressed, crunching beneath the wagon wheels. It is the first relatively flat ground they have seen in days, and Grace allows herself a tiny, cautious breath of relief. Perhaps they will reach Bear Creek by nightfall. Perhaps they will actually survive this. Then she sees the riders blocking the trail ahead, and her heart turns to ice. County deputies sit their horses in a neat line across the only route forward, 6 men with brass stars glinting on their vests, rifles held casually but unmistakably ready. And behind them, sitting astride a magnificent tall bay gelding with silver-mounted tack that probably cost more than Grace has earned in her entire life, is Rusty Joe Harper himself. Harper is not physically large, but he radiates authority and power in every line of his body. His tailored wool coat is immaculate. Despite the trail dust, his black Stetson looks fresh from a Denver haberdasher, and his face tanned handsome in a hard way, with pale blue eyes that hold all the warmth of winter sky, wears an expression of amused satisfaction. A cigar is clamped between his white teeth. When he sees Grace pulling the wagon to a reluctant stop, he smiles. "Well, now, Mrs. Harlow." He drawls his cultured voice, carrying easily across the open ground, touched with just enough southern gentility to make every word sound like honey poured over broken glass. "You've had yourself quite an adventure. I do admire persistence, truly I do. Shows character, shows real frontier grit." His smile widens. "But I'm afraid your little journey ends right here." Grace's mind races through impossible options. There is nowhere to run, only open ground on all sides and too many guns. Tokala's hand drifts toward his rifle, but Grace touches his wrist in warning, a tiny shake of her head. Not here. Not with the children in the line of fire. The deputies move in with professional efficiency, surrounding the wagon rifles pointed casually but unmistakably at chest height. They search the wagon, roughly scattering belongings, and Grace's heart sinks as she realizes what they are looking for. One deputy finds Briggs's confession letter folded inside Grace's bodice. He hands it to Harper with a leering grin and a crude comment that makes Grace's face burn with humiliation. Another finds the scorched payroll ledger tucked into Tokala's shirt and presents it to Harper with more ceremony understanding, without being told that this is the greater prize. Rusty Joe Harper's fingers close around both documents. His eyes flick over them, jaw tightening for just a fraction of a second, and the only crack in his composed facade before he recovers and turns to face his audience of deputies and prisoners with showman's timing. "Gentlemen," he announces, holding up both documents. "These appear to be stolen property from my office, taken no doubt during the violent attack on my payroll wagon, 2 weeks past the same attack that left the Morrison family dead with Indian markings all over the scene." He shakes his head with theatrical sadness. "It pains me to see a widow woman so misled by a savage that she'd participate in murder and theft. But the evidence speaks for itself." "Those documents prove what you've done," Grace shouts, fighting against the hands that suddenly grip her arms. "They prove you killed my husband. They prove you poisoned children. They prove you've been bribing judges and senators and—" But Harper is not listening. He is looking at the letter in his hands with an expression of cold calculation. Then, very deliberately, he pulls a silver lighter from his vest pocket. "No!" Grace screams, lunging forward. The deputies hold her fast as Harper flicks the lighter open and touches flame to the corner of Samuel Briggs's confession. The paper catches immediately. Harper holds it delicately by one corner, letting the flames consume line after line of damning testimony, Briggs's frightened handwriting, curling black, disintegrating into ash. He watches it burn with the detached interest of someone burning trash, and then drops the last flaming corner into the dirt and grinds it under his expensive boot heel with deliberate thoroughness. "That letter," Harper says conversationally, "was nothing but hearsay from a drunk clerk who'd say anything for a bottle. No court would have given it credence." He tucks the scorched ledger carefully into his inside coat pocket, patting it like a cherished possession. "This, however, is genuine company property, and it will be entered as evidence of your crimes, Mrs. Harlow, not mine." He steps closer to Grace, close enough that she can smell cigar smoke and expensive cologne. His voice drops to a whisper, meant only for her ears. "You've got more sand than sense, I'll grant you that. Real pioneer stock. But let me educate you about how the world actually works." He taps the pocket containing the ledger. "This book isn't evidence against me, it's insurance. It's a record of every debt owed, every secret held, every powerful man whose fortunes are tied to mine. Governors, judges, senators, they're all in here. If I go down, they go down. So they make very certain I don't go down." His smile is arctic. "Why do you think I keep such meticulous records? Not stupidity, Mrs. Harlow. Power. Information is worth more than gold, and I hold enough information to destroy or make kings." He straightens, raises his voice back to normal. "Sheriff Brennan arrests the Indian for murder, robbery, and conspiracy. Mrs. Harlow and her children will be held in protective custody as material witnesses. Sheriff Brennan, a tired-looking man, whose face is lined with the kind of weariness that comes from making too many compromises, hesitates visibly. But only for a moment. His job, and probably his life, depend on not crossing Rusty Joe Harper. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Brennan says to Grace, and he sounds like he might actually mean it. "Tokala, you're under arrest. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Tokala does not resist as they shackle his wrists with heavy iron manacles. But his eyes never leave Harper's face, and the look in those dark eyes promises violence and vengeance in a language older than words. For just a moment, Harper's smile falters, and something like genuine fear flickers across his features before he masters it. As soldiers force Tokala onto a horse and prepare to lead him toward Bear Creek, Harper mounts his bay and prepares to ride at the head of the cavalcade. But he pauses, glances back at Grace, with a final poisonous smile. "Oh, Mrs. Harlow, one more thing you should know." He lets the moment stretch, savoring it. "You really should be more careful about who you trust. Not everyone on this trail has been entirely honest with you." The words hit Grace like a physical blow. Her mind races back the fresh hoof prints after leaving Ezekiel's shack, the way Ezekiel had gripped her arm and urged her to run, that unreadable expression in his eyes. "Ezekiel." She breathes understanding, flooding through her cold as snow melt. Harper's smile widens with genuine pleasure. "Ezekiel Burns has been keeping me informed for 3 years. Decent man, really just terrified of dying. I pay for his medicine, he tells me, who's asking inconvenient questions. Simple transaction. He sent a rider the moment you arrived at his shack." Harper tips his hat mockingly. "Did you really think I'd let you wander into Bear Creek and hand evidence to Judge Holloway without preparation? I built an empire by knowing what my enemies are doing before they do it." He wheels his horse and rides toward Bear Creek, whistling a jaunty tune, leading his prisoners toward a jail cell and a noose. And the kind of justice that is no justice at all. Grace sits in the wagon, her children clinging to her, and watches the dust settle behind them. The betrayal cuts deeper than she expected, not because she trusted Ezekiel completely, but because she desperately needed to believe that some people still kept faith. Behind her, unnoticed in the chaos, Dr. Albert Finch sits his own horse and makes a decision. He is 63 years old, has spent the last 5 years as a coward and accomplice to murder, and he will be damned twice over before he lets this injustice stand unchallenged. He turns his horse and follows the cavalcade toward Bear Creek, already planning his next move. Bear Creek is Rusty Joe Harper's town in every sense that matters. As the grim cavalcade rides down the main street in the fading afternoon light, Grace sees his brand and his name stamped on nearly every building they pass. Harper's Mercantile and Shipping dominates the center of town, a 3-story structure of milled lumber and real glass windows that towers over everything else like a cathedral of commerce. Harper's Feed and Grain, Harper's Assay Office, Harper's Hotel. Even the Red Dog Saloon, whose swinging doors are already spilling drunken miners onto the boardwalk, bears a discreet bronze plaque announcing Harper as proprietor. The message is clear. This is not a town where justice happens unless Rusty Joe Harper permits it. Word of their arrival spreads fast. By the time the horses reach the sheriff's office, a squat stone building with barred windows and a patched roof, a crowd has already begun to gather. Grace can read the mood in their faces: fear, anger, curiosity, and underneath it all, the ugly eagerness of people who want someone to blame for their suffering. Harper dismounts with theatrical flourish and climbs onto a wooden crate in front of the jail. The sun backlights him like a halo, and when he raises his hands for silence, he gets it immediately. This is a man accustomed to being obeyed. Citizens of Bear Creek. His voice carries clear and strong, pitched perfectly for the crowd. Today marks a turning point for our community. For months we've lived in fear of Indian raids, good families murdered on the trail, their wagons burned, their livestock scattered. We've all known someone who suffered. We've all lost sleep wondering if we'd be next. The crowd murmurs a low, angry sound, like distant thunder. Today, Sheriff Brennan and his brave deputies have captured the leader of those raids, a Lakota warrior named Takala, known among his people as a war chief and raider. Harper's voice rises with righteous fury. The evidence is overwhelming. The pattern of attacks, the markings left behind, they'll point to this man and his band. Grace tries to shout, tries to force her way forward through the press of bodies. That's a lie. Listen to me, Harper's the one. But her voice is drowned in the rising noise. A deputy's hand clamps over her mouth, another arm wrapping around her waist to hold her still. Eli tries to pull her free and gets shoved hard into the dirt. Marta screams high and terrified. Harper's expression shifts to something like sympathy, a father figure dealing patiently with a hysterical woman. Mrs. Harlow has been through a terrible ordeal. Days of captivity with a savage who murdered her husband in the mines and then abducted her and her innocent children. She's confused, traumatized. She needs rest and medical care, not an audience. "My husband worked for you." Grace screams against the hand covering her mouth, and the words muffled but desperate. "He found out about your dam, about the poisoned water, and you had him killed. And then you've been murdering families and blaming the Lakota to cover your tracks." Some faces in the crowd look uncertain now, exchanging glances. But Harper is already moving, already controlling the narrative. "The woman is clearly delusional from her trauma," he says smoothly. "Sheriff Brennan, please see that she and her children are taken to appropriate quarters where they can rest safely. Dr. Finch will examine her when he arrives." He turns back to the crowd. The savage will be held in custody until Judge Holloway arrives tomorrow on the morning stage. Justice will be served according to law, as it should be in a civilized community. But even as he says it, voices in the crowd are already talking about rope and trees and dawn, and Harper makes no move to silence them. Rose Morton and the town schoolteacher, a thin woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that miss nothing, pushes through the crowd and takes Eli and Marta by the hands before the deputies can stop her. "These children need food and proper shelter," she announces in a voice that brooks no argument. "I'll see to them. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally." The nearest deputy looks to Harper, who nods slightly. Rose hustles the children away toward the schoolhouse, and Grace feels a tiny measure of relief even as she is dragged toward the jail's back room. The holding cell is barely large enough for one person, let alone three. There is a narrow bench, a bucket in the corner, and a high barred window that lets in a little light and air. The door is solid oak, reinforced with iron straps. When it closes behind Grace, the sound of the lock engaging feels like a coffin lid slamming shut. Down the hall, she can hear them throwing tokala into a proper cell iron bars, floor to ceiling, the clang of metal on stone, the rattle of chains. Through the walls, she hears the continuing noise from outside the crowd, working itself into increasing fury with each retelling of imagined atrocities. Grace presses her face to the crack between door and frame. "Sheriff Brennan, you can't let them lynch him. Judge Holloway is supposed to arrive tomorrow. Let him decide. Don't let mob justice happen in your town." There is a long silence. Then Brennan's weary voice answers from somewhere in the outer office. "Mrs. Harlow, I'm going to do my job as I understand it. Tokala gets a hearing in front of the judge tomorrow morning, just like the law requires. Nobody's getting lynched in my jail tonight. I'll stand in front of that door with a shotgun if I have to." A pause. "But ma'am, I'll be honest with you. I don't know anymore what's true and what's lies. I just know I'm going to follow the law and let the judge sort it out. It is not much, but it is something." Grace sinks down against the wall, wraps her arms around her knees, and tries to think through the exhaustion and despair that threatens to drown her. The letter is gone, burned to ash. The ledger is in Harper's pocket, and even if she could somehow get it back, Harper has already poisoned the town against them. No one will believe her without corroboration, without someone credible to stand beside her and confirm her story. As if summoned by her desperate thoughts, that there is a commotion in the outer office. Dr. Albert Finch's voice raised in rare anger. "I'm here to examine the prisoners, as is my medical duty, Sheriff, and I'm going to do it whether Harper likes it or not. Doc, maybe you should. I'm a physician, Marcus. Are you going to arrest me for providing medical care?" Footsteps, the scrape of keys. The door opens, and Albert pushes in, medical bag in hand, face set in determined lines Grace has not seen before. He examines Grace first, checking her for injuries with professional thoroughness, cleaning the cut on her cheek where a splinter struck during the river ambush. His hands are steady, but his voice when he speaks is low and urgent. I know about Ezekiel's betrayal. I should have seen it, should have warned you. But listen to me now, this isn't over. I'm going to testify tomorrow, tell Judge Holloway everything I know about the poisoned water and the falsified death certificates. Harper can threaten me all he wants. I'm done being afraid. They won't let you, Grace says bitterly. Harper owns this town. The judge will arrive. Harper will present his version with his bought witnesses, and Tokala will hang for crimes he didn't commit. Albert is quiet for a moment, his head bowed. Then he straightens, decision crystallizing in his lined face. Then we need to make sure there's more evidence than Harper can suppress. And we need to make sure that if something happens to you or me, someone else can still tell the truth. He calls to Sheriff Brennan. I need to examine the Indian too. Man's been shot and traveled hard. He needs medical attention, whether he's guilty or not. After some hesitation, Brennan unlocks the cell where Tokala sits on a wooden bench, wrists still shackled. Albert enters and begins examining the infected shoulder wound, his movements careful and professional. Grace presses her ear to the crack in the door and can just barely hear their conversation. You're infected again, Albert says quietly. And these irons are too tight. This is barbaric. I have endured worse, Tokala replies calmly. This will not be the worst day of my life, Doctor. A pause. Then Albert's voice even quieter. There's another prisoner here, in the next cell, brought in 2 days ago. Grace's breath catches. She has not even thought to wonder who else might be jailed here. From the adjacent cell comes a voice, dry, sardonic, touched with dark humor. Name's Riley. Though most folks call me Coyote Kid, on account of I'm too damn clever to get caught. Usually. Then you have had a bad week, Tokala observes without inflection. Coyote Kid barks a short, humorless laugh. You could say that. Harper hired me 6 months back to track some bandits supposedly raiding his shipments. Paid well, didn't ask too many questions, so I took the work. He spits. Turned out every job he sent me on looked a lot more like cleaning up his own messes than catching thieves. Burned wagons, dead families, always with convenient Indian signs left behind. I'm no saint, friend, but I don't kill women and kids for money. When I told Harper I was done, he suggested real politely that dead men never complain about back wages. So now you sit in his jail, Tokala says. So now I sit in his jail waiting for Harper to decide if it's easier to kill me quiet or stage another accident. Been listening to the whole circus outside. Sounds like you're in the same boat, except the whole damn town wants your neck stretched. Kid pauses. My condolences. Dr. Albert finishes bandaging Tokala's shoulder and leans closer, voice dropping to barely more than a breath. This man has information. He's been listening to deputies talk. Tell him Riley. Coyote Kid's sardonic tone fades into something harder and more urgent. Harper's not waiting for Judge Holloway to arrive. I heard his men talking last night when they thought I was asleep. He's got a backup plan just in case the judge starts asking inconvenient questions. At dawn tomorrow, before the stage arrives, he's going to drive his entire longhorn herd, we're talking 3, maybe 400 head, of mean half-wild cattle straight down through your Lakota camp by the river. Make it look like a stampede gone wrong. By the time anyone sorts out what happened, your people will be scattered or dead, the camp destroyed, and Harper can claim the whole river valley for grazing rights. Tokala's hands slowly clench into fists and the chains of his shackles clinking softly. His voice remains controlled, but drops into a register so cold and dangerous, it makes Grace's skin prickle even through the door. How many are in the camp now? He asks. Maybe 40 people, Kid replies. Women, old folks, children. Your hunters are out east after buffalo, that's what the deputy said. Harper waited until your warriors were away before making his move. Smart bastard. Cowardly, but smart. Silence stretches taut as a wire. Then Tokala speaks each word deliberate and precise. We must escape tonight, before dawn. There is no other choice. Agreed, says Coyote Kid. Question is how? This jail is solid, the bars are iron. There's 2 deputies on duty, plus Brennan out front. We're not punching our way out. Then we use their assumptions against them, Tokala says. They expect an Indian to be savage and stupid. We give them the appearance of what they expect while doing something they do not anticipate. Through the crack in the door, Grace watches Dr. Albert glance toward the outer office, then make a decision. His hands are shaking, but his voice is steady. I can help. They trust me. I can bring things in my medical bag that won't be searched carefully. Tools. And I can create a distraction when you need one. This will end your life in this town, Tokala says, meeting Albert's eyes. Possibly end your life entirely. You understand this? I understand, Albert replies. I'm 63 years old, and I've spent the last 5 years as a coward and a liar. If I die tonight helping to stop Harper, it'll be the best death I could hope for. Coyote Kid grins, his teeth white in his weathered face. Well, this is turning into quite the conspiracy. I like it. So what's your plan, Tokala? And in quiet, urgent voices, with Dr. Albert serving as messenger carrying information between the cells and Grace's locked room, they begin to plan an escape that has almost no chance of success, but is the only chance they have. Night deepens over Bear Creek. The crowd outside gradually disperses as the saloons open and call them in with promises of whiskey and warmth. The 2 deputies on duty, young men named Travis and Watts, neither particularly bright, both chosen more for loyalty to Harper's money than law enforcement skill, settle into the routine of a quiet evening shift. Sheriff Brennan, troubled and exhausted, extracts promises from his deputies that they will allow no one access to the prisoners, then heads home to his wife and whatever troubled sleep he can manage. Around midnight, Coyote Kid begins his performance. He starts moaning softly, clutching his stomach, rocking back and forth on his bench. The moans grow louder, more agonized. Then he begins to thrash, slamming himself against the cell bars with enough force to make real noise. Water. He gasps loudly. Need water. Something's wrong. He convulses, spectacularly foam, appearing at the corners of his mouth, a neat trick achieved by holding a small piece of soap against his cheek, something Kid had palmed hours earlier from the wash bucket when no one was watching. Deputy Travis approaches warily. Quit that noise. What's wrong with you? Harper, Kid, wheezes, making his eyes roll back theatrically. Had his cook put something in my food earlier. Said I knew too much. Said I wouldn't last till morning. He goes into another elaborate convulsion, the foam now dripping convincingly down his chin. Jesus, Travis mutters, genuinely alarmed. A death in the cells means paperwork questions, possibly blame falling on whoever was on duty. Hold on, hell, I'll get Doc Finch. You better not be faking. He turns toward the door, and that is when Tokala moves. The Lakota warrior has been working at his shackles for hours, using a thin metal file that Dr. Albert smuggled in, hidden inside a roll of bandages during his medical visit. The work has been agonizing, slow, quiet, every scrape of metal on metal disguised by shifting position or clearing his throat. But now one of the iron cuffs is weakened just enough. When Travis's attention is fully captured by Kid's performance, Tokala slams his shackled wrists hard against the stone wall with all his strength. The weakened cuff breaks with a sharp crack like a pistol shot. Travis spins, reaching for his gun, but Tokala is already moving with the speed of a striking snake. One arm shoots through the bars and grabs Travis by the front of his shirt, yanking him forward into the iron with brutal force. Travis's head connects with a meaty thud. His eyes glaze. Takala's free hand snakes down and plucks the key ring from Travis's belt before the unconscious deputy slides to the floor. 30 seconds later, both cell doors stand open. Coyote Kid wipes the soap from his mouth, grinning. Not bad for a savage. Not bad at all. "We are not finished," Takala says flatly, already moving toward Grace's locked door. "The other deputy will investigate the noise soon." He unlocks Grace's door, and she nearly falls into his arms, having been pressed against it, listening desperately. "The children Rose has them at the schoolhouse. We need to. We get them and we ride," Takala says. "But first, we must deal with Deputy Watts." Watts, hearing the commotion, comes down the hallway with his gun already drawn, suspicion written across his face. But he is facing 3 desperate people who have nothing left to lose. Takala goes high-diving over the desk in the outer office. Coyote Kid rolls low to the side, coming up with Travis's fallen revolver already in his hand. Watts tries to track both targets and succeeds in hitting neither. Kid's shot takes him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Takala's fist connects with his jaw, and Watts goes down in a heap. They drag both unconscious deputies into the cells, shackle them with their own irons, gag them with torn strips of their own shirts. It is not kind, but it is not murder, and right now, that is the best mercy they can afford. "Horses," Takala says. "We need horses' weapons, and we need to reach the high pasture before Harper drives that herd at dawn. We have perhaps 4 hours." "That's madness," Grace protests, even as she follows him toward the door. "That pasture is where Harper's whole operation is based. Dozens of armed men, hundreds of cattle. We'll be riding straight into his stronghold." "Yes," Takala agrees with terrible calm. "Because my people are between here and there, and we have 4 hours to scatter that herd or turn it back before they stampede through my camp and kill everyone I have left in this world." Grace looks at him, at this warrior who saved her life and her children's lives, who has lost so much already, and is about to risk everything on a desperate gamble. And she nods. "Then we'd better stop talking and start riding." They slip out into the night. Bear Creek sleeps most of its citizens drunk or exhausted. They steal horses from Harper's own corral, 5 animals with tack already on a stroke of luck they do not question. Coyote Kid also liberates several rifles and boxes of ammunition from Harper's gun shop, moving through the darkened building with the easy confidence of a professional thief. "Consider it back wages," he mutters, loading weapons with swift efficiency. Rose Morton meets them at the edge of town, with Eli and Marta wrapped in blankets and the children's eyes wide but determined. "I'm coming with you," she announces in a tone that permits no argument. "You'll need someone to watch the children while you're busy not getting killed." They ride hard through country Grace has learned to read over the past brutal days. Takala leads them not by the main trail, but through ravines and dry washes that hide their movement, always choosing routes that offer cover and multiple escape options. He navigates by starlight and instinct, reading the land the way other men read books. As false dawn begins to gray, the eastern sky, they reach high ground overlooking Harper's holding pasture. The pasture spreads below them like a vision of pastoral abundance turned nightmare. Hundreds of longhorns milling and lowing in the pre-dawn darkness, their horns a forest of bone catching the first pale light. Lanterns move among them where Harper's riders circle slowly on horseback, keeping the animals bunched and nervous. And there, unmistakable even at this distance, sits Rusty Joe Harper himself on his bay gelding, directing operations with the calm authority of a general deploying troops. The terrain is brutal. A long, steep slope drops from the holding pasture directly toward the river valley, where Takala's camp sits in peaceful ignorance of the death about to roll down upon them. If those cattle stampede down that slope, nothing will stop them until they hit water, and they will trample everything in their path to bones and blood and screaming chaos. Grace's hands shake on the reins. We can't fight them. There are too many. We don't fight them. Takala says, his eyes scanning the slope with tactical intensity. We frighten them. Cattle are herd animals, they follow each other blindly. If we can panic them in the wrong direction away from the camp, the riders will lose control. That's where your powder comes in. Coyote Kid says, producing the small wooden crate of dynamite they somehow managed to grab during their escape. We plant a charge on that rocky shelf over there. He points to an outcropping of stone above and to the side of the main herd, and blow it at just the right moment. Doesn't need to bring down the whole cliff. Just needs to make enough noise and throw enough rock to spook those cattle sideways instead of straight down toward your people. That's insane, Dr. Albert says, but his voice holds admiration rather than criticism. Brilliant, but insane. Do you have a better plan? Takala asks. Silence. Grace makes a decision. Rose, you stay here with the children, and Dr. Albert, you're our retreat. If we fail, you ride hard for the camp and warn them, give them at least a chance to scatter before the stampede hits. She looks at Tokala. I'm coming with you. You need covering fire while you plant that charge, and I'm the best rifle shot here besides Kid. Don't argue. Takala looks like he wants to protest, but Coyote Kid interrupts. She's right. We need 3-1 to plant the charge 2 to provide cover. And if I'm being honest, Takala, you're still weak from that shoulder wound, and I'm better with explosives than I am with long rifles. The lady comes. After a long, tense moment, Takala nods. He kneels before Eli and Marta, his voice gentle but serious. You stay with Dr. Albert and Miss Rose. You do exactly what they tell you. If we do not return by sunrise, you ride east as fast as these horses will carry you. Do you understand? Both children nod wide-eyed and trying to be brave. Grace kisses each of them fiercely, tasting salt her tears or theirs she cannot tell. I love you. Remember that. Always. Then she picks up Leander's old Sharps rifle, checks that it is loaded, and follows Tokala and Coyote Kid down into the darkness. The descent is treacherous. Every step threatens to send loose rock cascading and alert the guards below. They move with agonizing slowness, testing each foothold, freezing when a stone breaks free and rattles down the slope. The constant lowing of nervous cattle covers small sounds, but it also means the herd is already on edge, already one loud noise away from blind panic. They reach the rocky shelf. Coyote Kid identified a narrow outcropping, perhaps 50 feet above where the main body of the herd is concentrated. It is perfect tactical ground. A blast here will rain debris directly into the outer edge of the herd, panicking them sideways and upslope rather than down toward the camp. Kid gets to work immediately, his hands steady and sure despite the darkness and danger. He places the dynamite charge deep into a natural crack in the rock face, packing it carefully, playing out a long fuse with practiced movements. This'll give us maybe 90 seconds to get clear, he whispers. When it blows, it's going to be loud as hell. That herd will go absolutely mad in every direction. We need to be well away and ready to ride like the devil himself is chasing us. Takala positions himself where he can see both the herd and their escape route, ready to signal when the moment is right. Grace sets herself behind a boulder, sighting down the rifle barrel at the nearest group of Harper's riders patrolling the perimeter. Her heart hammers so hard she can feel the pulse in her temples, but her hands are steady on the familiar wood and steel. That is when a guard they had not seen, concealed in shadow on the opposite side of the shelf, shouts a warning that shatters the pre-dawn stillness. Riders on the ridge, Harper, we got. Grace does not think. Training and desperation take over. She swings the rifle and fires in one smooth motion. The recoil slams into her bruised shoulder with agonizing force. But her shot is true high and to the right, not meant to kill, but to suppress. The guard's shout cuts off as he dives for cover, and his own rifle shot goes wild into the air, the bullet whining off stone harmlessly. But the damage is done. Below them, Harper's men are shouting, pointing upward, spurring their horses toward the slope. The herd is already shifting, sensing danger beginning to mill with the nervous energy that precedes stampede. "Light it!" Tokala barks. "Light it now." Coyote Kid strikes a match, the tiny flame flaring bright in the darkness, like a falling star, and touches it to the fuse. The fuse catches with a hiss and a spit of sparks racing toward the packed charge with terrifying speed. "Run!" Kid shouts, and they are already running, scrambling back up the treacherous slope with loose rock cascading beneath their boots. Harper's riders are firing now, muzzle flashes blooming orange in the pre-dawn gloom. Bullets whine and ricochet off stone. One passes so close to Grace's head, she hears it buzz like an angry hornet. She stumbles, nearly falls, and Tokala's hand closes around her elbow in an iron grip, hauling her up and forward without breaking stride. The explosion, when it comes, is a sharp crack that punches the air itself, echoing and re-echoing off every surface, until it sounds like the earth splitting open. The rock shelf disintegrates in a spray of stone fragments and choking dust. Debris rains down onto the outer edge of the herd, striking animals on their horns and backs and flanks with sharp, painful impacts that trigger the most primal instinct of all, flee. The cattle explode into motion. The sound is indescribable. A bass rumble that shakes the ground like an earthquake, rising instantly to a roar that drowns out everything else. 400 longhorns moving at once create a physical wall of noise and vibration that travels up through the earth and into bone, into chest cavities, into the very substance of reality itself. The bellowing is continuous and deafening, a sound that erases thought and replaces it with pure, visceral terror. The smell hits a heartbeat later, dust so thick it is almost solid, choking, blinding, mixed with the musk of terrified animals and the acrid bite of gunpowder still hanging in the air. And they are not moving downslope. They are moving sideways upslope, spreading in a panic tide away from the explosion, exactly as Tokala predicted, exactly as they desperately needed. Grace reaches the top of the ridge and hauls herself into the saddle with movements made clumsy by exhaustion and adrenaline. Eli and Marta cling to Rose, who is already mounted. Tokala vaults onto his stolen horse with fluid grace despite his injuries. Coyote Kid is last up, still grinning like a madman. That kid shouts over the continuing chaos below. "Was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." But there is no time for celebration. Harper's riders, those who have not been caught in the stampede or thrown from panicked horses, are reorganizing with professional speed. And Harper himself, his face twisted with fury, even at this distance, is screaming orders and pointing directly at the ridge where they sit, silhouetted against the lightening sky. "Ride," Tokala commands. They ride like demons are at their heels, which in every way that matters they are. The horses blow hard, pushed beyond reasonable limits. Behind them, pursuit organizes. Ahead lies only broken country and the desperate hope that they can stay ahead long enough to reach Bear Creek before Harper's men run them down. They are halfway back, horses lathered and stumbling with exhaustion, when riders appear ahead on the trail, cutting off their escape. Grace's heart sinks like a stone. Trapped. They are trapped between two groups with nowhere left to run. Then the rising sun breaks over the eastern horizon, flooding the world with sudden gold and red light, and Grace sees something that makes her gasp. The riders blocking the trail are not Harper's men. They wear the blue wool and brass buttons of the United States Army, and at their head, sitting a fine gray mare with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, is a man in a black coat and flat-brimmed hat, Circuit Judge Theodore Holloway, who arrived on an earlier stage than anyone expected, accompanied by a full patrol from Fort Bridger. And standing with them, looking battered but determined, is Sheriff Marcus Brennan, who rode out at first light when he discovered his deputies locked in their own cells and apparently decided which side of history he wanted to stand on. Rusty Joe Harper galloping hard with his remaining men to finish what he started rounds the bend, and finds himself face to face with federal authority, backed by military force. For the first time since Grace has known of his existence, Harper's iron composure cracks completely. He pulls his horse up short, and his hand moves instinctively toward his coat, toward the ledger that contains all his power and all his crimes. "That's far enough, Mr. Harper," Judge Holloway says, his voice carrying the natural authority of 30 years on the bench. "You're going to dismount slowly, and you're going to hand over whatever's in that coat pocket. And then we're going to have a very long conversation about murder, fraud, corruption, and conspiracy." Harper's face cycles through a dozen expressions in as many seconds: fury, calculation, fear, desperate defiance. His hand is inside his coat now, fingers on the ledger. For a moment, Grace thinks he might actually try to destroy it, right here, burn it, or tear it apart despite everything it represents. But Coyote Kid, still mounted beside Tokala, raises his stolen rifle with deliberate casualness and says conversationally, "I wouldn't, friend. These folks have had a long night. Let's just make this easy, shall we?" The soldiers level their own weapons with professional precision. The mathematics of the situation become unavoidably clear. Harper is outnumbered, outgunned, out of options, and out of time. Slowly, reluctantly, like a man surrendering his own soul, Rusty Joe Harper pulls the scorched ledger from his coat and hands it to Judge Holloway. His face is ashen, his hands shaking with rage or fear or the crushing weight of an empire collapsing in a single moment. "That ledger is private property. Company records. You have no right." "I have every right," Judge Holloway interrupts, already paging through the book with methodical attention. His eyebrows rise higher with each page. My God. This documents corruption that reaches all the way to the territorial capital. He looks up and his eyes are hard as stone. "Mr. Harper, you are under arrest for murder conspiracy to commit murder, bribery of public officials, fraud, theft, and about a dozen other charges I'll formalize once I've had breakfast. Soldiers, take him into custody. Search him thoroughly. I want every document he's carrying." As blue-coated soldiers move in and shackle Harper with the same iron manacles that held Tokala just hours before, Grace finally allows herself to breathe. She slides down from her horse, and her legs nearly give out. But Tokala is there, his hand steadying her. "We did it," she whispers, hardly daring to believe it. "We actually did it." "No," Tokala replies quietly, and there is something that might be the ghost of a smile on his stern face. "You did it. You refused to stop. You carried truth across half the territory despite every attempt to silence you. This victory is yours, Grace Harlow." And finally, standing in the dusty trail with the morning sun warming her filthy, exhausted, battered body, Grace allows herself to cry, not from sorrow now, but from relief so profound it feels like being born again. Eli and Marta scramble down from Rose's horse and crash into their mother, and Grace holds them both and sobs into their hair, while Tokala stands watch over all of them, a silent guardian even in victory. The nightmare is over. The real work of healing can finally begin. The trial is held 3 weeks later in Bear Creek's largest space, ironically the second floor of Harper's former mercantile building, now seized by the territorial government, as evidence and collateral. Every bench is packed. People stand along the walls and crowd the doorway, desperate to witness justice finally being served. Judge Theodore Holloway presides from a makeshift bench with stern dignity, his black robes incongruous against the rough lumber, but his authority unquestionable. To his right sits a court recorder from the Capitol Pen, scratching steadily. To his left, a representative from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, sent after preliminary reports reached Washington. and suddenly made this remote corner very interesting to federal officials. Rusty Joe Harper sits shackled at a table between two soldiers. He has aged a decade in 3 weeks, his expensive clothes, rumpled face, unshaven eyes hollow. The man who once controlled an empire through fear and money has been reduced to a prisoner awaiting judgment. The prosecution presents its case with methodical precision. Dr. Albert Finch testifies first. Standing straight despite his years, he admits his own complicity in falsifying death reports, and there are tears on his face as he confesses, but he does not flinch from truth. For 5 years I signed my name to lies, he says, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. I marked poisoning as natural causes and murder as accident. I saw children dying from arsenic in their water, and I wrote consumption on their certificates because Rusty Joe Harper paid me to stay quiet and threatened to destroy me if I didn't. His voice breaks. I knew, and I did nothing. That guilt will follow me to my grave. But I will not be silent any longer. He produces his private ledger documenting every false report. It is devastating testimony from a man who has decided confession is better than cowardice. Ezekiel Burns testifies from a stretcher dying from the infection that has spread beyond any medicine's ability to treat. His voice is barely audible, but the court recorder leans close to catch every word. I betrayed them, Ezekiel whispers. Grace Harlow came to me for help because her husband, my friend, trusted me. And I sent word to Harper because I was afraid and because Harper paid for medicine that bought me a few more months of life. Tears run down his wasted face. Leander trusted me, and I got him killed. I'll answer for that soon enough. But first, I'll tell the truth. He produces the copied mine ledger page documenting Harper's illegal water diversion. Combined with Dr. Albert's testimony about poisoned children, it establishes beyond doubt that Harper knew exactly what his operation was doing and chose profit over life. Deputy Watts testifies with his arm still in a sling. He describes being present when Harper planned fake raids, describes collecting bonus pay for attacks designed to look like Indian violence, describes the cynical calculation behind each murder. Harper told us to leave war paint and feathers, Watts says flatly. Said the important thing was making it convincing so settlers would blame the Indians and the army would clear them out. Then Harper could claim the land legal-like. Rose Morton testifies about attempts to forcibly ship the children east. Arthur, whose well went dry, testifies about Harper trying to buy his land for pennies. Piece by piece, witness by witness, the case builds into an unassailable mountain. Grace testifies standing in the witness box, with her hands folded and her voice clear. She reads Samuel Briggs's confession from memory, having memorized every word. She describes finding the burned wagon, the gunfight at the River Harper's ambush, and his own admission that the ledger was insurance against the powerful men he had corrupted. He told me himself, Grace says, meeting Harper's eyes across the courtroom, that the ledger wasn't evidence against him, but proof of what powerful men owed him. He kept it because destroying it would destroy his power. His greed was his weakness. He couldn't let it go even when it became a noose around his neck. Finally, Tokala testifies. He stands, does not sit in the witness box, his bearing straight and proud despite the healing wound, despite everything. He speaks in careful English about the children who died, about Winona's death, about false accusations and years of persecution for crimes his people never committed. For 2 years, we have been called murderers, Tokala says quietly. We have been hunted for crimes we did not commit. Harper's men killed and burned and painted themselves with our symbols to make hatred grow toward us. He pauses, his dark eyes sweeping the courtroom. The white man's law has not often been just to my people. But today I stand in a white man's court and speak truth, and I am heard. perhaps that is the beginning of something better. The silence that follows is profound. The defense attorney, nervous, clearly wishing he was anywhere else, tries to argue circumstantial evidence and misunderstandings. But his heart is not in it. The evidence is overwhelming. Judge Holloway's ruling is swift and comprehensive. Harper is found guilty on all counts. All his holdings are seized and ordered sold at public auction, with proceeds distributed to victims' families, the Lakota band-affected farmers, and to fund a medical clinic under Dr. Albert's direction. The illegal dam is ordered dismantled immediately by Army engineers. The Wolf River will be restored to its natural course. Harper is sentenced to 20 years hard labor at Territorial Prison. He will die a pauper in a cell forgotten and unmourned. As soldiers drag Harper toward the door, he looks back once at Grace with pure hatred in his eyes. But Grace meets his gaze calmly, without fear, and watches until he disappears from sight. Outside, the sun is shining on Bear Creek, without Harper's shadow for the first time in years, and the river can be heard running in the distance. Over the following months, the valley transforms. The dam comes down in stages, carefully demolished by Army engineers. When the final section breaks, water thunders back into its ancient channel with a sound like celebration. The river runs muddy at first, then clearing, then cold and clean and strong. Farmers redig irrigation ditches. Wells run clear again. Children splash in shallows, laughing. The Lakota camp moves to a new location on a safe river bend. They build new lodges, establish fish weirs, watch salmon return after years of absence. Grace chooses her homestead carefully, a beautiful stretch of riverbank upstream from the camp, close enough to be neighborly, but far enough for appropriate privacy. With help from grateful farmers and guidance from Tokala on reading the land, she raises a sturdy cabin with a stone fireplace and a wide porch facing the water. The work is hard but satisfying. Every log she lifts, every stone she places, is a piece of future built with her own hands. Leander would approve. Rose establishes a school under the cottonwoods, teaching children from both town and camp together. It is imperfect integration. Old prejudices die slowly, but it is a beginning. Coyote Kid drifts through occasionally, never staying long, but always leaving evidence of his passage. A deer carcass, split firewood. Once a stack of books for Rose's school with a note for the kids. Don't let them grow up stupid. Dr. Albert runs his clinic with dedication, treating all who come regardless of ability to pay. He will never fully forgive himself, but he works every day to earn redemption. Tokala spends his days rebuilding with his people, but he rides past Grace's homestead often. The excuses become thinner and less necessary over time. He teaches Eli to track, to read animal signs, to understand the land's language. He shows Marta which plants are medicine and which are food. When Grace works beside him, their hands brush and linger. One autumn evening, Grace struggles to set posts for a washing line. The ground is soft from rain, and the posts keep tilting. She is tired, frustrated, close to tears. Tokala appears from the river path, leading his horse. Without a word, he braces the tilting post with both hands, holding it perfectly vertical. "Let it lean on me," he says softly, and the words carry layers of meaning beyond carpentry. Grace looks up at him, their faces close in the fading light. She sees the scar on his cheek, the lines at his eyes, the steadiness that has never wavered since he found her broken wagon on the prairie. For a moment, neither speaks. The world narrows to just them, the wind, and the sound of water flowing past. Then Grace nods and begins shoveling earth around the post, packing it firm. They work in perfect rhythm, the way they did under fire, the way they did facing death. Only now the danger has passed, and the weight they share is different, quieter, more enduring. When the posts are secure and the line is strung, and they stand close, neither stepping away. "Thank you," Grace says quietly, "for everything." "Where else would I go?" Takala replies. "You and your children are part of this land now, as my people are. We share the same water, the same earth. We have bled on the same ground. That is not a small thing." Grace reaches out and takes his hand, calloused, warm, strong. "Stay close," she whispers. "Close enough to see the river rights honored. Close enough to teach the children. Close enough that I don't have to do this alone." "I will," Takala promises, holding her eyes, "for as long as you want me." That might be a very long time. "Good," he says and smiles. "I am a patient man." The first snow comes in late November. A rider arrives with official papers, a land deed in Grace's name, and a treaty recognizing the Lakota band's permanent river rights, signed by Judge Holloway, Dr. Albert, and in careful practice letters, Tokala. Grace stares at his signature, understanding what it cost him to travel back to town, to trust the law that had so often betrayed his people. When Tokala rides up that afternoon, she holds up the treaty without speaking. "The river rights needed a Lakota voice," he says simply. "Paper carries weight in your world. Judge Holloway said if my name was on the treaty future, men who want to take what is ours must break their own law to do it. They must admit they are thieves." That took courage. "I trusted what you showed me," Tokala says. "That sometimes the white man's paper can be truth instead of lies." They sit together on the porch steps, watching the river flow past, watching Eli and Marta play with a wooden boat Tokala carved. "This spring I want to plant apple trees," Grace says thoughtfully. "Leander always said the territory needed more fruit trees. Would you help me?" "I would be honored," Tokala replies. "And perhaps you would teach my sister's children to read. They need to understand the white man's words to navigate what is coming." "I would like that very much." It is not a dramatic declaration of love, just a mutual choosing a decision to build something together in the ruins of what was lost. That evening, they walk to the river's edge together alone for a moment, while the children eat supper inside. Tokala takes Grace's hand, simply directly. His palm fits against hers with the rightness of inevitability. "The river remembers everything," he says quietly. "The poison and lies and children who died. But it also remembers healing. Water always finds its way home, no matter how long the journey. Do you believe that?" Grace squeezes his hand and looks up at him. This warrior who saved her life and chose to stay when staying was harder than leaving. "Yes," she says simply. "I believe we already have." He raises their joined hands and presses his lips gently to her knuckles, reverent, intimate, promising, without words. Then they stand together, watching the river flow past, carrying away old sorrows and bringing possibility. Downstream broken stones from Harper's Dam lie, half-submerged moss already softening their edges. Soon they will be indistinguishable from natural stone, and memory will fade except in stories. Above them, smoke rises from the cabin. Through the window, Eli and Marta set the table with easy familiarity. The yellow dog lies on the porch, peaceful. From the camp upstream comes the sound of drums and singing. Grace thinks of Leander and knows he would approve of the justice fought for, of the life being built of love, found again with a man who understands what it means to lose everything and keep going anyway. "Thank you," she whispers to memory and land, and whatever brought Tokala to her wagon that desperate day. The river does not answer, rivers never do, but it keeps flowing, patient and eternal, indifferent to human joy or sorrow, but providing the foundation for both. On its banks, a woman who refused to stop fighting and a warrior who chose to stay, begin the careful work of building a life together, teaching their children that justice is possible, and love can be found, even in terrible loss, that the land itself can heal if given time and courage to tear down what was built wrong and start again. The sun sets, stars emerge, and the river, restored at last, keeps flowing clean and cold and free, living testament that water always remembers the way home.